Hello, good evening, and thank you for this wonderful day that God has made for us to glorify His name. We missed our class this week, Monday, and we are likely going to miss it again next week, and so it is customary or it is right for me to do something so that I will not miss out completely. So that's the reason why I decided to make this video with this explanation and then forward it to you guys so that we will not miss out. I will likely do another one again next week to cover up for our class for next week. So today we are going to discuss individual differences in the workplace. And by way of introduction, all of us know that all human beings are not the same, and there are variations in individuals, and these variations may be in terms of their skills, maybe in terms of their motivation, that which motivates them. It may be in terms of the kind of person they have, that's their personality. It can be in terms of their intelligence. These variations or these differences that occur in an individual is what we refer to as individual differences. And these individual differences occur in workplaces in different perspectives. Now, individual differences, particularly in workplace, can be in so different dimensions. It can be in the way employees work and learn. It can be in the way they perform their jobs. It can be how they relate with others. Now, people learn differently, different learning styles, different speed, and at different rates. So, of course, people who have higher cognitive ability definitely will grasp information much quicker than people who have, lower level of cognitive ability. And the way they grasp information, instruction, and the way they maneuver or navigate within this context is usually different from someone who has lower level of cognitive ability. Now, others may need more time, as we are even in class. Of course, we know that there are some of you who get information so quickly. Some of you may not get it quickly or get it immediately. Some of you may need more time. They may need more demonstration. Some of you may even need step-by-step guidance in a way of grasping information or getting something that is new. So in an organizational setting, this has a way of affecting how training programs are designed, particularly for a particular organization. So there is another way too that individuals differ, is how they perform their tasks. Now, different individual abilities, personality, and how they are motivated has a way of determining how people perform their task in an organization. Now, we can have an instance of someone who has, higher level of conscientiousness. You remember personality, the big 5 personality traits. We have neuroticism, openness to experience, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and one other. So people who have higher level of conscientiousness, and of course you remember that time in your 100 level or even in this 200 level, you remember that conscientiousness is taught as an aspect of personality, where people who have higher level of conscientiousness pay more attention to details, they are confident and all. So what we're trying to explain here is that an individual who has higher level of conscientiousness will obviously, complete their task more accurately and more carefully because they pay attention to details. And so someone who is not organized, someone who is not scoring high on conscientiousness will definitely not be able to organize tasks very well. That's the reason why you see that you give people task to do, and then you come back to see that there are a lot of errors in it. So this is another area where individual differences is applicable in workplace. And the third area is how they relate with others. You know, the way even in class, as among yourselves, you see that the way you relate with one another is different across different individuals. You know, people who have higher level of agreeableness, for instance, and have higher level of emotional intelligence, they have a way of influencing their interpersonal relationship more than someone who scored less on agreeableness. You know, we are still talking about personality here, and then intelligence, you know. So someone who has a personality that is agreeable, that is always outgoing, agreeing with one another, and then has higher level of emotional intelligence, you know, trying to understand how people's emotions work and relating with them, we have a way of influencing interpersonal relationship much more than someone who have less level of agreeableness. So here we understand that, you know, some employees have a way of cooperating with others easily. In a work setting, you ask somebody something, the way they respond to you may be different from the way Mr. B, or what Mr. B will respond, or how Mr. B will respond will be different from how Mr. A will respond. So this is another way that we can, you know, talk about personality in this case. So now from the theoretical perspective, of course, from the theoretical perspective of industrial and organizational psychology, we are meant to understand that employees also differ in their abilities and traits. Their behavior is influenced by internal characteristics. Matching people to job has a way of improving productivity, and then there are other empirical supports to this. Now, first and foremost, employees differ in their abilities and traits. Start from the theoretical perspective. I told you earlier that no two individuals have the same level of intelligence, have the same level of personality, or have the same level of skills. Now, these differences, of course, can be measured. They can be measured and they can be predicted. So theoretical foundations in industrial and organizational psychology tells us that employees differ in their abilities and traits. And that's the reason why I told you earlier that no individual is the same. Remember, we're discussing individual differences in workplace. Now, their behavior is also influenced by their internal characteristics. That's another aspect of theoretical perspective. Now, we understand that, you know, behavior in the workplace is not always random. It is actually always shaped by people's cognition, people's personality, and then people's motivation. So what you see one person doing, the other person may not be able to do it. Or what you see the other person doing, the third person may not be able to do it because of their differences in terms of their internal factors. And internal factors here, like I mentioned earlier, are factors such as motivation, factors such as personality, and their cognition. Now, from the theoretical perspective too, we are also meant to understand that when people are matched on the right job, there's a way it can improve, you know, productivity. So when an employee's characteristics is in line with the job or the demands of the job, of course it has a way of improving how that person, you know, performs while the person is at work. For instance, you give someone who is a talkative, someone who talks a lot, and the person finds his or herself in a broadcasting house. So the internal characteristics of this person are already matching what the person is doing. So you see productivity will be very high. Someone who loves calculation finds his or herself in accounting, in an area where the person deals with figures like bank and the rest of them. You see the level of productivity will be high. And so, for instance, you now have somebody who loves talking, in a place where there are calculations, you see that there will be a mismatch. So productivity will definitely not be improved because the right person is not matched on the right job. So this is just the theoretical foundations from the industrial and organizational psychology, and there are empirical, support from different authors that have that put in place. Now, we measure individual differences also in terms of cognitive ability, in terms of personality, in terms of skills and ability, in terms of value and attitude, in terms of motivation, and then in terms of emotional intelligence. I made mention of this earlier. We have, how do we measure individual differences? I've made mention of it earlier. I talked about individuals' cognitive ability. I talked about individual personality. I talked about their skills and what they can do, their competencies that are naturally inherent in them, their values and attitudes. That's what they believe. Is another very important aspect of measuring individual differences. Their motivation, what drives them? What is it that is driving them to act the way they act? What is it that is pushing them to do that which they are doing? And then their emotional intelligence, that's their ability to manage emotions, not just themselves or not just their emotions, but others' emotions. Now, let's start taking them one by one. How we measure individual differences in workplace, and mention them. I listed them somewhere, so I'm going to start taking them one by one. The first one is cognitive ability. Now, cognitive ability in this case represents the individual's reasoning, individual's attention, individual's problem-solving skills, and then memory. Now, we'll define cognitive ability as the mental capability of an individual to learn, to think, to reason, to solve problems, and to process information. So that is in terms of cognitive ability. Now, you know that we don't have, because we are different across boards, we don't have the same cognitive ability as well. There are some people's level of attention will be higher than others. Others' memory, the way they remember and pay attention will be different from others. Their reasoning capabilities is also different. So under cognitive ability, these are the things that we measure about an individual. The individual's reasoning, the individual's memory capability, the individual's attention, and how the individual solves problems. That's problem solving skills. Now, we also understand that employees with high cognitive ability have different characteristics from an employee with a low level of cognitive ability. Now, an employee who has high cognitive ability is able to learn new tasks faster, is able to understand complex instructions, is able to solve problems independently. An employee with is able to solve problems independently. Now, I tried to explain earlier that cognitive ability has to do with these four different things: reasoning, memory, attention, and problem solving. Now, when we say that employee with higher cognitive ability, what are the major characteristics? What are the major things that we will know that this person has higher level of cognitive ability? The person is able to learn new tasks faster. Of course, that's self-explanatory. The person is able to understand complex instructions. The person is able to solve problems independently. It doesn't depend on others to be able to solve problems. Now, what about someone who has a lower level of cognitive ability? Of course, the person may require more supervision because the person may not be able to learn new things faster or understand complex instructions. So there will be need to be supervised, or that person will need to be supervised. And of course, there will be need for repetition, because when you say the first one, the person may not be able to grasp it easily. You need to repeat it, and then you need to simplify instructions for it to be easy for that person to understand. So here, like I told you earlier, cognitive ability has to be measured in terms of memory, attention, problem solving, and reasoning. Now, we understand from this particular aspect that an individual who has higher cognitive ability can learn faster, understand complex instructions easily, solve problems independently, but then someone who has low cognitive ability will not be able to do these ones. This is the one aspect where we will measure individual differences in workplace. The second aspect is in the aspect of personality. I'm taking them now in details because I mentioned it earlier in the introduction, but I'm taking them now in details. Now, for me as a person, personality is that you that in you that makes you the you that you are. I've always said that before. The you in you that makes you the you that you are is your personality. And it has the way of shaping individual behaviors over time. Now, from the psychological explanation, we have personality traits defined as enduring patterns of thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and other attributes, other measurable attributes that distinguishes one individual from another and have a way of influencing how they interact with the wider world. That is the comprehensive definition of personality traits. You may see different definitions elsewhere, they may not be defined this way, but that's just a way personality can be defined. Now, personality has different ways of measuring it. Of course, for those of you that remember personality measurement or personality traits where it was taken as a course, I don't know whether you've taken it already or it's still going to be in front, but you can talk about type A, type B, type C. You can talk about other aspects of personality too, but in this case now we are looking at the big 5 personality traits where we talk about openness to experience, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Openness, of course, like you know, has a way. Openness. It's someone who is open. Is always, open to new ideas, just like the word itself says. Now, an individual with open personality traits, has a way of creating, generating new ideas and adapting to change easily. One who has openness as a personality trait can create or generate new ideas, and adapt to change easily. When you are open, you come to UI and you are open, you can easily generate ideas, you can easily adapt. But when you are closed-minded, when you are not open-minded and you are closed-minded, you become rigid. So it becomes difficult for you to adapt. Now, what about conscientiousness? Conscientiousness has to do with individuals that are organized and are responsible. I told you before, organized, responsible, attention to details. And they are able to meet deadlines and flow with, follow rules strictly because they are paying attention to details, they are confident, they are responsible. So they are able to meet, rules strictly, they are able to meet deadlines, they are able to follow rules. What about extraversion? Extraversion is like an outgoing person, someone who is outgoing. And an outgoing individual performs well in roles that require interacting with people. For instance, someone who has higher level of extraversion can perform better in customer relations. So for instance, when you are employing and then you discover that you have someone who is outgoing, someone who can relate with others very well, it is better to place such a person in a place where the person will be interacting with customers. Or maybe like marketing, areas of marketing. So the person goes out, interacts with people, is able to convince people easily. That is for extraversion. Now, what about agreeableness? Agreeableness deals with cooperating with people, enhancing teamwork, relating with others in terms of work. There are so many tasks in an organization that it may be difficult for you to do them on your own. So it is important that you have a team. Sometimes it may be multidisciplinary, sometimes it may just be within your department. So someone who who score high on agreeableness can work with individuals, can cooperate with people, and do well in teamwork. And the last but not the least in this case is neuroticism. Neuroticism deals with having an unstable emotions. Having an unstable emotions. And people who have higher level of neuroticism may experience high level of stress and anxiety when they are working or when they are on a particular job. So it is important that you understand these personality traits of your employees, differences in terms of openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Who has this trait? Who has that trait? And then be able to relate it in such a way that you place them in areas where it will be easy for them to bring out their personality trait and be able to give you higher level of productivity. So if you don't understand their personality profile and you are just placing them anyhow, most of the times it becomes difficult to adapt. Like I explained earlier, you have someone who is outgoing, who is always talking, who is always, vocal, and then you place the person in area where there are calculations. The person may find it difficult to function well. But you now take the person to a place where the person is interacting with customers, somebody who is vocal, going on television or on radio. You see the person will perform optimally. So you need to understand the personality, different personality traits of your employees to be able to place them in places where their real productivity or their real characteristics will match with the job demands. That way, it will be easy for them to flow. That's the second aspect of how we measure individual differences. Remember, I told you we measure individual differences, we measure their cognitive abilities, we measure their personality. The third aspect that we can measure individual differences is skills and abilities. What are the learned or natural skills or capabilities that an individual has that will help the person to perform a particular task effectively? These are some of the things that we measure. Some of these skills are learned, some of them are natural capabilities. Now, skills here we can refer to them as learned proficiencies, or as learned proficiencies that an individual acquires through training or through experience, like driving, coding, communication skills, and all those things. Now, abilities on the other hand, are more innate or natural talents. Remember, skills can be learned, all right? It can be learned either through proficiencies or through experience or through organized trainings and something like that. You can learn a skill. Abilities deals more on an individual's natural or innate talents, and these are able to can enable an individual to perform their tasks very well. Now you have someone who is physically coordinated, who has analytical reasoning, who has problem solving abilities. Most of these things may not be acquired through learning, but some of them can be acquired through learning, but most of them are acquired as innate or natural talent that an individual has. Now, remember I told you earlier that skills can be developed through training, all right? Skills can be developed through training, and some of these skills can be technical skills, can be communication skills, can be managerial skills, and so on and so forth. So they can be developed through, training. So most of the abilities of an individual may not be developed through training. Some of them comes naturally with the person, or they are innate. That is for skills and abilities. So you need to understand these things too. What skills does your employee have? What are the skills that they have that can enable them perform optimally on a job. This is another area that we can measure individual differences. What are the abilities that this person, what do you think this person is capable of doing that can, support what you are doing in your organization? This is the third area where we measure individual differences. I mentioned the first as what? Cognitive abilities, the second as personality, and the third as skills and abilities. I hope we are following. All right, let's continue. The fourth aspect that we can measure individual differences in an organization is values and attitudes. Values and attitudes. Now, go back and reflect a little bit and think, what are your values? As an individual, what are your values? Just take a brief moment and think, what are your values? Is it you don't do this, this is what you value more, this is what you need, you value more, this is what are the things that you value? What are your values as an individual? The deep beliefs or that which is so important to you. Is it security? Is it money? Is it achievement? What is it that is your value? Now, attitudes on the other hand has to do with perceptions or feelings towards an individual work. What are these feelings that you have towards your work? Is it that you feel that you're satisfied with this job? So you look at values and attitude in terms of how employees value what they value. And what is it that they value? Is it going to actually influence their performance? Now, employees who value achievement, of course, like I gave an explanation here, employees who value achievement will work harder for promotion, while those who value stability prefer secure roles. Just clear here. Someone who has value achievement, I want to achieve this, the person will be working hard so that they'll have higher promotions. But for instance, somebody whose value is just on stability may not care whether it is going to be, he or she is going to be promoted or not. The person's concern may be more or less or more on how secure that particular job is. Now, I'm coming back to this again. What are your values as an individual? Then what are your attitudes or your feelings towards what you are doing? So by the time you combine these two together, we measure individual differences across them. Some people value money, some people value achievement, some people value security, some people value whatever it is that they want. So that will also influence their attitudes towards what they are doing. So, for instance, somebody who values money is not getting it well. The attitude towards the person's job may be negative. Do you understand? Now, positive attitudes, of course, will lead us to higher commitment, better performance. Someone who has positive attitudes towards a particular job will be committed higher and then will perform better. Remember, like I said, that which you value will determine your attitude towards your job. So if what you value is what you are getting, then your attitude towards that job will definitely be positive. And once it is positive, it will lead you to commit yourself more. It will lead you to a better performance. But what if that which you value is not what you are getting on that job? Your attitude will definitely be negative, and that will lead to what? Absenteeism, turnover, moving from one place to another, moving from one place to another. So like I'm trying to say, attitudes and values are the fourth aspect which we can measure individual differences. Individuals differ across their values and across their attitudes towards their work. And these things are capable of, influencing how people work and how they perform their job in an organization. That's number 4. Number 5 is motivation. Number 5 ways that will measure individual difference is motivation. And what is motivation? Motivation is that driving force within you as an individual. That innate force, that driving force that directs your behavior, that directs and sustains your behavior towards a particular thing. Motivation is not just directing your behavior. Motivation is directing and sustaining that behavior. So when you are motivated to do something, it will direct you to start doing it, and that motivating force or that innate force will also sustain it. It's not something that you start today and then you stop tomorrow. No, the innate force will sustain, will direct and sustain that behavior towards achieving that individual. So different people are motivated differently in an organization. What is it? You need to understand what is it that motivates an individual across the people that you are working with. Individual differences. What is motivating me? What is my driving force may not be your driving force. What is my drive, another person's driving force may not be the other person's driving force. And so these differences are across individuals in an organization. So when an individual is highly motivated, remember, the person will work harder, the person will persist longer. No matter, sometimes it may not even be the salary. There are times that I remember when I was working in a place, sometime some years ago, I was owed salary for 3 years, but I was still working. What has actually motivated me to do that? So the driving force, that innate driving force, will initiate that behavior, will direct it, and will sustain it. So one who is highly motivated will definitely work harder. The person will persist longer. The person will achieve higher performance because the motivating force is driving, is pushing, is initiating, and is pushing it higher. But now, what if there is low motivation? Low motivation, of course, will definitely result to poor performance, lack of initiatives, and one way or the other. So like what I'm trying to say is that what is it across the people you are working with? The individual differences may occur in their motivation too. What is it that is motivating them? Is it salary or is it passion? And so if it is salary, the more you pay or the higher you pay, the higher they are motivated. The lower you pay, the lower they are motivated. And you remember we said when there is high level of motivation, they work harder, they persist longer, and then they achieve higher performance. But when the motivation is low, of course, you will have negative attitude towards work, counterproductive work behaviors, and so on and so forth. That's number 5 method, or number 5 way that we can measure individual differences. I hope it's entering small. Okay, we'll proceed. Now, the next is emotional intelligence. The next is emotional intelligence. It's another method of measuring individual differences in a workplace. Of course, I told you that emotional intelligence has to do with understanding and managing individual differences, or my individual emotions, individual emotions. How do you understand and manage your emotions and other people's emotions? When somebody shouts at you, how do you respond? When you notice that somebody is this kind of person that is sadist all the time, the person is always sad, one small thing will irritate the person, how do you approach the person to be able to get something from that person? A lot of women know how to do this more. They have husbands who are always aggressive, but whenever they need something from that aggressive man, they will have a way of managing it and approaching, starting with pet names, giving him the best food and all of that, and then they now present their cases and it becomes something meaningful for them. So emotional intelligence has to do with how you manage and understand individual emotions. Now, in workplace, emotional intelligence is an ability of an individual to first of all recognize, then understand and manage, then effectively use their own emotions and those of others to improve on what they are doing in their work. It can be in terms of communication, it can be in terms of teamwork, it can be in terms of job performance. But how do these individuals understand? First of all, recognize, and then understand, then manage, and then effectively use their own emotions and those of others. Like I said, it's not just about your own emotions as a person. It has to do with those of others too. And how do you use that to be able to improve in terms of your teamwork, in terms of the way you perform your job, in terms of the way you communicate. Now, emotional intelligence that is high has a way of controlling someone's anger and stress. So an employee with high emotional intelligence has a way of controlling their anger more. They have a way of controlling their stress more. And then they have a way of understanding how other people feel. And then they can also use that as a way of resolving conflict effectively. You see that there are some people that something is happening in a place and they just get there, and before you know, everything calms down because they have a way of understanding their emotions and the emotions of others and be able to navigate their way through these emotions to be able to solve some of these issues effectively. Now, what about those with low level of emotional intelligence? Of course, you see that it's the negative, the opposite of it. They react with impulse. Every small thing they are flaring up, and then they struggle with teamwork because nobody works, nobody is working the way they want them to work, or nobody does whatever it is that suits him or her. So it becomes difficult. So emotional intelligence is one way that will measure individual differences. You look at how these people manage their emotions and emotions of others. So when you have an employee, you try to check their emotional intelligence. How are they managing their emotions? How are they managing emotions of others? Of course, you cannot carry someone with a low level of emotional intelligence and put him or her in customer care because the person will just be fighting with them there every day. But someone with a very high emotional intelligence is able to understand their emotions and emotions of others. So when a very angry customer comes in and begins to shout, the person is able to calmly attend to the person and then say, be like, sir, no problem. We understand. We can take care of this. Just don't be angry. But then, if it is someone who's low on emotional intelligence, as the customer is getting angry, the person working here will become more angry, as the case may be. So you need to know the individual differences in terms of their emotional intelligence too, to be able to probably properly place them in places where their functionality will be optimized. Now, how can we apply these individual differences, these things that we use in measuring individual differences? How can we apply them in organizational settings? First of all, we need to look at it in terms of recruitment. What is recruitment? Recruitment has to do with the process of selecting individuals to fit vacant positions in an organization. The process of selecting individuals to fit vacant positions in an organization. It has a process. So that's why I say it's a process. Now, first of all, when you are recruiting, you need to go back and look at those 6 or 5 things that we mentioned: cognitive ability, skills and abilities, personality, emotional intelligence, and so on and so forth. Who are those candidates whose abilities match the job requirements? Who are those candidates whose personality match the job requirements? Who are those candidates whose skills and abilities match the job requirements? I explained this earlier and I said you have someone who is outgoing, someone who is always vocal, and then you are advertising for a broadcaster. You now go to get a stammerer or someone who doesn't talk at all or someone who doesn't relate at all. And then you want to bring the person to come and be, your broadcaster. It will not work. So you need to look at the differences in these people. First of all, what are the job requirements? The person that is going to occupy this job, what is he or she going to be doing? Now you begin to look out for individuals with these characteristics that are matching these job requirements. So this is one of the places where individual differences is applied in industrial settings. You look at the differences in the differences in individuals that you have across different pool of applicants that comes for the job. So you begin to check their personality, their abilities, their cognitive ability, and so on and so forth, to be able to identify that person whose abilities, whose personality, whose cognitive ability matches, or emotional intelligence matches your job requirement. That's one of the area. Another area is in training. Over time in an organization, there is need to conduct trainings, because what you are doing today, maybe tomorrow there will be evolvement in the process. And as organizations evolve, there is need to equip and re-equip your staff to be able to meet up with the evolving job demands. Now, training programs are designed based on the differences of individuals in an organization. Training programs are designed in such a way that they will match all the skills of people in that organization. For instance, if you have people who have low cognitive ability and high cognitive ability mixed together in an organization, and then you are organizing training, then you need to put into consideration the fact that there are some people that can grasp this thing fast, but there are some people that can grab it slow. So your training program will now be designed in such a way that it will accommodate everybody that is either high on cognitive ability or low on cognitive ability, so that you will not be leaving anybody behind. The same thing is applicable to personality, ability, emotional intelligence, and all. So during training, you can use that as a way of designing program based on how people learn, based on the capabilities, based on their abilities, and based on their differences. The third aspect of where this thing is applied, individual differences is applied in organizational setting, is in job placement. I made mention of this before. Selection is different from placement. Selection is a recruitment, rather. Recruitment is different from placement. Of course, during recruitment process, you need to get several stages before you eventually select. And after selecting, you need to place these individuals on the job. So assigning roles based on individual strengths is very, very important. That is what industrial and organizational psychologists will call job fit. That is putting the right person on the right job. Of course, there are times when you will be able to recruit qualified, very intelligent set of people. But if your recruitment is right and your placement is not right, you will still not achieve your goal. So your recruitment has to be right, and your placement too has to be right for you to be able to achieve your goal in the organization. So assigning roles based on individual strength is another area that we apply individual differences in organizations. The right person should be placed on the right job so that you can get the optimal performance that you are looking for. Last but not the least is performance appraiser. Performance appraiser has to do with evaluating individual performance based on their capabilities, fairly based on their capabilities. Over time in an organization, the organization will do what is called performance appraiser. That appraiser will have to do with looking at what people have been doing and how well they have been achieving how well they have been, helping in achieving organizational goals. So appraisal is now conducted. See, the candidate A, candidate B, candidate C, candidate D. How is his or her performance on this job? Does he require additional training? How is this one on this particular job? Does he require training? Is he fit for promotion? Can he remain on that role? So another area that we can apply this in performance appraisal, so that we evaluate employees fairly based on their capabilities. And HR, human resource managers, have a very big role to play in this case, because they are the one that take care of all these things in terms of recruitment, in terms of training, in terms of job placement, and in terms of what? Performance appraisal. So Remember we talked about, person job fit is another area that we can apply. I talked about this before. Person job fit means matching employees' characteristics on the job demand. I made mention of that earlier. So when fit is very high, employees will perform better. Of course, when you have right people on the right job, they will perform better, they are satisfied, they stay longer. But when your fit is not, right, of course, you are going to have stress will increase, you have performance will decline, turnover will rise. Turnover in this case in terms of people coming in and going out, coming in and going out, coming in and going out. So we have practical examples in terms like a banking jobs. Someone who is an extrovert will succeed in marketing due to what? Interaction. I made mention of this earlier. So someone who is someone who is a extrovert, someone who is outgoing will succeed in customer relations and marketing. Because the person is always ready to talk to people, always ready to interact and have conversation with people to be able to attract potential customers to your bank. Now, the same thing is applicable to someone who is analytical. The person will succeed in auditing, because of attention to details. Analytical in this case, we can put it under conscientiousness, right? Yes, and put it under conscientiousness. So an analytical individual will succeed better in auditing because the person pays attention to details and so on and so forth. Now, this has a lot of implications in organizations, because what then are the implications? First of all, understanding individual differences will help us to improve what? Productivity. Because when right people are in the right job, they perform better. All right. Now, another implication is that it will help enhance well-being of individuals. So people will feel satisfied when the job matches their abilities. Like what I am doing now, I love teaching, I love talking, I love teaching, I love impacting. So I'll perform better in lecturing compared to when you now take me to, sit in one place and be doing one thing over and over and over. I love research, I love traveling. So when I do research and I travel and I get the knowledge, I love sharing it. So it enhances my well-being. I'm feeling satisfied doing what I'm doing. And it also has implication in terms of promoting teamwork. When you have a balanced team, when you have a team of people that have similar values, similar goals, similar personality, similar attitudes, and so on and so forth, it's a way that the team will be balanced and optimally they will perform very well in the organization. And it has a way of reducing what? Conflict. Because when you understand individual personality through emotional intelligence, right, it reduces the level of misunderstanding that you will have in the organization. So this is what we talked about for today. Remember that we started with individual differences in an organization, and then we have all that taking place up to this time. So there is an assessment here for you. It contains your attendance too. So I'm going to put it in the comment section. But you can type it the way it is. Make sure you participate in this assessment, because I'm going to collect your scores and your details that will serve as your attendance for you to show me that you actually attended this class and attended it to the end. So you copy the link, or I will send it. I will also copy it and paste it in the comment section, the first comment section. I'll paste it there for you to go through it and then be able to attempt what is there. So thank you and God bless you.